This is exactly where season 3 of One Punch Man is going to end, at least according to me. I just spent tons of time scraping through every single chapter in the Monster Association arc, piecing chapter after chapter together, and I think I have come up with a very solid list of episodes. With that being said, I do want to clarify right now that I'm going under the assumption that season 3 will have 12 episodes. I know there's been talk about 24 episodes from the fan base, people kind of scared that they're going to try to fit the entirety of the Monster Association arc into 12 episodes, which is literally impossible. Like, you can't do that. There's so many freaking fights, chapters, and just general major events that happen that like need their own episodes on their own. There's no way that you can just cram everything into 12 episodes. I don't know. So no, the entirety of the arc is not going to be covered in season 3, and I think for good reason. And on that note, I know a ton of people on the internet are super upset that JC Staff is once again doing the One Punch Man anime after doing such a terrible job on the second one, according to a lot of people.
Oh shit, here we go again.
The good thing here is that since this is JC Staff doing season 3 once again, we at least have some form of continuity to go off of when it comes to like predicting this next set of episodes, right? And by that I mean taking a look at the formula that JC Staff used in order to break up these chapters into individual episodes. So taking a look at season 2 in terms of how many chapters it covered and how many chapters per episode it covered, we can pretty much nail down exactly where this season is going to end. But first, I know many of you, including myself, have been fiending for any bit of One Punch Man Season 3 news, as it's getting closer and closer to dropping this year. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of waiting for a questionable Twitter account to give me that information. I am getting desperate. So you know what, I figured why not just try and ask the man himself, Saitama. And I was able to do this by using Polybuzz. Polybuzz is an app you can download for free with a link in my description and chat with over 1,000 different characters, including your favorite ones from One Punch Man, of course. Whether it's asking for updates on season 3, which didn't go very well, by the way, or just seeing what it would be like to chat with your favorite S-Class hero, Polybuzz has everything you can think of. You can even create your own heroes on the app, and pretty much create your own One Punch Man fanfic with them if you want to. Download Polybuzz today with the link in my description, so you can start mingling with the S-Class heroes yourself. But anyway, so doing just that, taking a look at season 2, we can see that it covered from chapters 38 to 84, starting with the introduction of King and ending with that epic fight scene between Garou, Bang and Bomb, and Genos, of course, just before being carried away by Phoenix Man to the Monster Association underground base. So that means season 2 covered 46 chapters. Now I know depending where you read the manga, whether it's Viz or Shonen Jump or whatever, like your numbers are going to be different from mine, right? The important thing to note here is that that means that season 2 covered an average of 3.8 chapters per episode. So let's just round it up to 4. That means that using that same math, if we picked up from chapter 85, which is where season 3 should begin, we're looking at season 3 ending at around chapter 131. And for those of you wondering exactly what chapter that is, chapter 131 is the chapter titled Won't Lose, where Metal Bat, Tank Top Master, and Moomin Rider finally join the action from the hospital. And I know what you're thinking already, like why would they end season 3 on that chapter? That'll be so freaking anticlimactic. And I agree with you. Well, I'm just gonna say right now that the episode list that I came up with, the 12 episodes, is not going to end there. Like, there's no way. That'd be way too anticlimactic. It's definitely gonna have a very good ending. At least I think so. I don't know. I'll let you guys decide. And with that being said, let's just get right into it. So kicking off the season, episode 1 would cover chapters 85 through 88. These chapters cover the initial S-Class hero meeting where they plan the upcoming Monster Association raid. It also includes the iconic Saitama restaurant scene where he realizes that he lost his wallet, and as soon as Fubuki shows up, he orders a plate of fries and invites her to eat some. But we also come to find out that Garou is in that same restaurant and just dine and dashed, which was the exact plan that Saitama had, so it worked perfectly for him. He was like, yeah, you ate some fries, so we technically split the food, so just cover it this time. I'm gonna go get this dine and dasher though, and he just like slithered right out of there. It was pretty funny. So as we all know, Saitama catches up to Garou and just like anticlimactically knocks him out. But after this, we get this super epic fight between Garou, Royal Ripper, and Bug God. This is actually the scene that we see in the teaser trailer that we just got. This also means that episode 1 is also going to be simultaneously covering the meeting between Zombie Man and Dr. Genus, as Dr. Genus is the one to explain the existence of the limiter as Garou is fighting these monsters. So the episode likely ends with the end of that fight with Garou likely getting all slashed up and left for dead. So then hopping over to episode 2, it would make sense for it to cover chapters 89 through 92. These chapters include the massive Hot Pot chapter chapter, which to be honest is one of my favorite chapters of the entire series because it gives you everything great about One Punch Man in a single chapter. So this episode would of course cover the comical antics between Saitama and his little friend group that he's building here with Fubuki, Bang, Bomb, even Dr. Kuseno pops in to hang out, and after everybody fights over the hot pot at the same time, King gets knocked out, and then we'd cut over to Garou waking up from his injuries, going back to the Monster Association to find Terrio, taking out Royal Ripper, fighting Overgrown Rover, and then ending with him coming face to face with Giro. So if the episode plays out this way, then we're obviously going to be getting a ton of Garou fighting. So that being said, it's likely a lot of content is going to be cut out from this episode, but where I think they absolutely cannot sacrifice any type of content is in the fights that Garou has in this episode. I mean, Garou is obviously a huge focal point of this season, so he needs as much time to shine as possible. And that's exactly what he's going to continue to do in episode 3, because this episode is going to be covering chapters 92 and 93. And I know you're thinking that's only 2 chapters, but these are super long chapters. It actually equals out to 130 pages just for these 2 chapters. So it would make sense that they would only cover these 2 for this episode, especially considering what happens in it, because this is where Garou takes on Monster King Orochi in the absolutely epic battle that they have. I would definitely not be upset if this fight takes up at least half the chapter, because there's definitely enough quality material to do so. But this episode would also cover the initial phases of the Monster Association raid, where we get the introduction of the support team, and we'd also see the moment that Saitama lifts the manhole cover and finally enters the Monster Association base. But after the results of the Garou versus Monster King Orochi fight, we're likely going to cut away from him a little bit and go to the support team and the Monster Association raid on the surface. But that is not all that episode 4 is going to cover, not by a long shot, because I actually have it covering chapters 94 through 96. So that means that we not only get the introduction of the support team and all these new characters and see the S-Class show off for a little bit, we also get the first major S-Class hero fight of this arc, and that's the fight between Flashy Flash, Hellfire Flame, and Gale Wind. This for me personally is one of my most heavily anticipated episodes out of the entire season, and honestly I want to see the entirety of the fight. I don't want to see any content get cut out from this one. The issue is that if the episode does end up covering these chapters, that means that it's going to be covering a whopping 190 pages of content. So it's almost guaranteed that some form of content is going to be cut out from these chapters, and I hope that is not this fight. Where I think the cuts are going to be coming from, which I don't think is very good either, but I think is the best of the 2 options, is cutting out a good chunk of the initial Monster Association raid on the surface. Maybe some of the members of the support team that get some shining moments in the manga won't in season 3, which does kind of suck because I do enjoy the support team, but you know, if you need to make cuts somewhere, that's probably where it's going to have to be. But ending the latter half of episode 4 with the fight between Flashy Flash, Hellfire Flame, and Gale Wind is definitely nothing to be disappointed about, but the action is definitely not ending there because it's going to carry over into episode 5 into 2 entirely different fights. This is because episode 5 is going to cover chapters 97 to 101, which covers the entirety of Zombie Man versus Pureblood and also Child Emperor versus Phoenix Man. So Zombie Man's fight with Pureblood is super cool, one of my favorite of the entire series, but also very short, which I think can work to the benefit of this episode because we can get kind of that warm-up fight at the very beginning, maybe cover the first 5 minutes or even 3 or 4 minutes, maybe not 3 or 4 minutes, let's say 5 minutes, but lead right into the much longer fight between Child Emperor and Phoenix Man. I know a lot of you are questioning how the hell could they fit this entire fight into one episode and do it well, and although I kind of agree that it is going to be kind of squeezing a lot of content into one episode, I don't think that the fight is as long as a lot of people think. I feel like a lot of people, especially those that have read the manga from week to week for a long time now, kind of feel that way about this fight because of how tedious and long the retcons and redraws were for this fight. This fight got redone numerous times, and I feel like that made it seem a lot longer to people than it actually was. It is a pretty long and honestly epic fight though, so I do hope they don't cut any content out of this. I don't think they're gonna have to, maybe they'll have to cut out 1 or 2 little scenes here, but I don't know, I think it could be a very good episode if done right. But again, with episode 6, we continue the action because as you all know, this arc is filled with a ton of quality fights. So what I have here for episode 6 to hit the halfway point of the season is having it cover chapters 102 to 106. These chapters cover a My Mask versus Super S, all the disciple stuff with the private military group, which honestly I hope they cut out the majority of to save a lot of time and animation space, and the latter half of the episode covers the battle between Atomic Samurai and Black S, ending with the confrontation between Zombie Man and Homeless Emperor. This is one of those episodes that seems like it's bouncing around all over the place when you kind of hear me talking about it to you, but once you actually see it, I feel like it's going to flow nicely because it could go from Amai Mask fighting Super S and using Atomic's disciples being there as kind of a segue into Atomic's fight. Like maybe one of them are wondering exactly where Atomic is or how he's doing, and that's how we cut away to that fight. And of course that perfectly transitions into the Homeless Emperor with Zombie Man confrontation, because after all, that entire scene starts with Zombie Man being concerned about some rumbling that he's hearing that's actually coming from Atomic Samurai's fight. So like I said, it all kind of flows nicely. And it's also good that these are each individually like pretty short altercations versus some other fights, because all they got to do is cut out like 80% of the disciple stuff, like them fighting a monster or other monsters, and I think that'll give these fights more than enough time to breathe on their own in this episode. As a matter of fact, episode 7 is also going to have this bounce around vibe to it, because it's going to be covering chapters 107 to 111, meaning first it's going to cover the fight between Puri Puri Prisoner and Bakuma, which honestly I think is an underrated fight. I don't know, I just love Puri Puri in the manga. He always cracks me up when he's in a chapter, and it's also going to go into him fighting the monster cadre Neon. If Puri Puri isn't your cup of tea though, don't worry, because we're going to cut over to some much more exciting stuff in the latter half of this episode, because we're first going to get Tatsumaki finally finding Giro, and even more important than that, we're going to have Saitama finally finding Monster King Orochi. As a matter of fact, I'm predicting that the big cliffhanger that episode 7 is going to leave off on is this sweet panel of Saitama coming face to face with Orochi. That means that going into episode 8, we're going to cover that entire fight, but we're also going to be covering more than that, because this episode is going to be covering chapters 112 to 116. So for a good chunk of the first part of the episode, we're going to be getting that fight, and of course have that super crucial scene where the altar that Orochi thought was for him starts crumbling away to reveal a much bigger figure in the mural. Of course, as we know, it is the monster god being introduced for the official first time in the series. You can make an argument that there's been other times he's kind of popped up kind of low key about it, but I think this is technically like the first official confirmation that he exists. But after this fight, we then are going to have the fight between Fubuki and Super S, which I know a lot of you fellas out there are going to enjoy, but you might be disappointed to hear that I believe they're going to be cutting a good chunk of this fight out of the episode, at least shorten it greatly, because it's not as important as everything else in this episode, because it's sandwiched in between Saitama versus Orochi and the end of this episode, which is Saitama finding Flashy Flash finally, and also Garou waking up, because we got to remember this entire time he's been like in slumber from his beating down from Monster King Orochi. And we certainly are going to be getting some more Garou in episode 9, but not until the very end, because episode 9 is going to cover chapters 116 to 121, meaning we're going to be covering the entirety of Neon versus the support team on the surface, and also Neon versus Drive Knight. I think this is going to be one of those like low-key sneaky good episodes, because I for one enjoyed that fight between the support team and Neon, and I definitely enjoyed the fight between him and Drive Knight, because that's when we finally get to see like Drive Knight's full potential, or at least what it could be. So fingers crossed they do that fight some justice. But just as importantly, this episode is also going to cover Genos finally coming into the picture, because people forget that till this point Genos was at home like scrubbing the toilet and cleaning dishes. So our boy's finally here to put in some work. But what I think is going to be the most exciting part of this entire episode is the very end, because we are finally getting the face-off between Super Alloy Darkshine and Garou, because we're going to leave off on that cliffhanger of them facing off, but also leave off on the cliffhanger of Child Emperor discovering evil natural water. And why I think is going to be ending here exactly is because it's going to tee up episode 10, because episode 10 is going to be covering chapters 122 to 126. So the beginning of this episode is going to be cutting away to various shots of the different S-Class heroes being beaten by monsters, whether it's Atomic Samurai getting beaten down by Black S. I'm pretty sure at this point Pig God is taking on Gums, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be showing all these heroes getting whooped and talking about the S-Class itself, and it explains that the Hero Association was only confident about this Monster Association raid because of one single hero, and that's Tatsumaki. So that's when we're going to cut over to Tatsumaki taking on Giro again, and this is actually going to be to the point where Tatsumaki is fighting Psychos, not her proxy or whatever you want to call it. The episode's not going to mostly focus on this fight though, because we're also going to cut over to the rail cart antics that Saitama, Flashy Flash, and Minako have. I think that's going to be a fun little tension breaker for this episode, because the tension is going to go right back up. That's because it's going to be covering the fight between Fubuki, Bang, Bomb, and Overgrown Rover, which again is one of those scenes that I think is going to be shortened a little bit, and we're going to end this episode with Garou and Darkshine finally clashing. So with the last 2 episodes of this season, I set it up to where we're getting like non-stop epic action. The foot's going to be on the gas until the very end here, starting with episode 11, which is going to be covering chapters 126 to 128. This is where we're going to be getting a good chunk of the Garou versus Darkshine fight, and also hop back and forth with the Tatsumaki versus Psychos fight. This would allow the animators to draw these fights out as long as possible, because they're going to be the only focal point of this episode, just hopping between action continuously. And we're going to end this episode with Garou finally starting to get the upper hand on Darkshine. Dude is starting to go crazy and overwhelm him. And on the flip side, this is also where we're going to get the cliffhanger of Orochi finally being born, meaning the moment where Psychos merges with Monster King Orochi. So finally coming to episode 12, the season finale of season 3, we're going to be covering chapters 129 to 132. But with that being said, as you're going to see, there's probably going to be a need to pull some stuff from future chapters, like pull certain scenes from like chapter 136 or something, for example, and put it in this finale. And I feel like doing that is the only way to end this season off on a positive note, to, you know, feel satisfied with the season itself. And you'll see what I mean as I explain this episode. This episode would cover the end of Garou versus Super Alloy Darkshine and conclude that whole scene, leaving on the massive cliffhanger of Garou finally going under his monster transformation. This is actually technically going to be the last time that we see Garou in this season. They might push this scene to the very end of the episode to kind of let that be like the final moment of the season. I think that would be pretty damn epic, but that means they would have to move some stuff around, like what I also have happening in this episode, because if the Garou stuff gets pushed to the very end, this means this episode would start off with the surface, getting this crazy view of Psychos towering over the entire battlefield. Like honestly, they really do have to put a good chunk of the animation budget into this single episode, because dude, I'm gonna tell you right now, if we see a 100% CGI Orochi, I feel like you can already imagine the amount of memes that are gonna come out from it. I can't imagine it's gonna look good. I feel like since we get Orochi revealed here, we're gonna have to see her in action, so we're gonna have her perform some feats in this episode, maybe see her fight Tatsumaki briefly. But one thing I have to pull into the final episode of the season is Genos finally showing up to the battlefield and doing that awesome dragon blast that he does to deflect Orochi's blast. Like that panel where he does this like lightning dragon attack that looks so freaking insanely awesome. Like we cannot have season 3 end without our boy Genos being involved somehow. And I mean, honestly, this season and through this arc, he's pretty MIA for the first half of it. So I think it's almost guaranteed that Genos is going to at least show up at the very end here in episode 12. But we're going to cut away from that with things looking absolutely dire. Like Orochi is looking insanely powerful. And then we cut away to the final moments of Darkshine versus Garou. And as we leave off on the aforementioned massive cliffhanger of Garou finally transforming, that'll close out episode 12 and therefore end season 3 of the anime. Let me know what you think about this episode list in the comments though. Let me know where you think you would change some stuff up or if you would change it completely. That is it for this one though. Have an absolutely wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, whatever. And I'll see you guys in the next video.